Hey everybody, thanks for coming out for our talk. Is Keanu Reeves in the audience here? I'm excited about that. uh, yeah, thank you. We have a Metaverse session here, and so hopefully you're in the right room for that. My name is Dean Takahashi. I'm the lead writer for GamesBeat at VentureBeat, and I've been covering tech news for about 34 years or so, mostly out in Silicon Valley. I've been covering games for about 27 years, and at VentureBeat for now 15 years. I write on a daily basis about games, and that's sort of how the metaverse became very familiar to me. I actually read Neil Stephenson's Snow Crash novel that came up with the term metaverse back when it came out in 1992. So it's weird to see science fiction actually get talked about these days as something real. And so this is really fun for me to have this kind of conversation. I also run the GamesBeat Summit conferences, and we have one coming up on May 22 and 23 in Los Angeles, and Metaverse and blockchain and games in Hollywood are kind of the themes that we like getting into. So I'd like to welcome Timmu Tõke, who's the CEO of Ready Player Me, and I'm going to have him introduce more about himself.
Thank you, Dean. Hi, everyone. Great to be here. So my name is Timmu. I'm the CEO of Ready Player Me. Ready Player Me is a cross-game avatar platform for virtual worlds for the metaverse. We see that people spend more and more time in virtual worlds every year that goes by and every decade that goes by. And that's where we started the company 9 years ago. And we see that the metaverse is not a single app or a single experience. It's a network of thousands and millions of experiences and worlds. So it makes sense for you as the user of the metaverse to have an avatar that kind of travels with you across many different virtual worlds and kind of becomes your virtual identity that is persistent. And from a developer's point of view, when you're building a new game or a new virtual world, you need to build an avatar system for a game to give your users cool avatars. And building a good avatar system takes many months, maybe even years, and it's a major pain for developers. So we work with 6,000 companies now that use our avatar system, our avatar tech in their games, in their virtual worlds. And as a user, you can use the same exact avatar in all those different places. And why we think that's kind of important to work on is because the metaverse kind of has two potential paths. One of the paths we're going to talk more about today. And those paths are basically a closed metaverse, closed path, where the metaverse is going to be owned by one company. And there's an open path, which means that the metaverse is more like the internet, where you can navigate between different pages and worlds and have a consistent experience across many of them. And we think that's a more positive path. And for that to really happen, there need to be services and protocols and standards that link together different virtual worlds, so it will become more of a network and not owned by one company. And I've been building avatars for 9 years, starting from hardware, 3D scanners, to custom building avatar tech for big gaming companies like Tencent and so forth, and eventually building Ready Player Me. Close to 100 people now and scaling quickly.
So 9 years, were you thinking about the metaverse way back then, or was something else guiding you to this sort of inspiration here, I guess?
Yeah, totally. So, I was thinking about the metaverse more than I was thinking about school when I was 12. So RuneScape was a game I spent a lot of time in, for example, and my first hustle was selling RuneScape Gold to other kids in school. So, that was already kind of made it obvious that virtual worlds and virtual assets have real value in some sense. And then we started messing around with 3D printing, which led to 3D scanning things, which led to 3D scanning people, which led to building a company around avatars. And it was mostly because Oculus was acquired by Meta or Facebook back then, and we were like, okay, VR is gonna happen, and VR needs avatars, and VR, avatars play a huge role in VR because you're literally looking at the other person's avatar face to face. That's the whole experience, or an important part of the experience, and that's where we decided to build an avatar company, and the core bet was basically that people will spend more time in virtual worlds over time, and which means that avatars will be more important over time and need to be great and will be impactful to kind of solve that problem.
And the name of the company is Ready Player Me, and it inspired by Ready Player One, of course. And in that book and in the movie, it's really a single company that controls this whole metaverse. The Oasis, created by James Halliday, right? And it's pretty dystopian in that way, right? I mean, it's not an ideal thing to have this sort of universe of virtual worlds controlled by one company, right?
Yeah, that's right. It's kind of weird that we named the company after the movie, but we're actually trying to avoid that scenario. And we named it after the movie actually because back when we named it, which is 3 years ago or whatever, people didn't know what the metaverse means, So, and we wanted to make it clear that it's not like avatars for games only, or like games as we know them, but it's like a bigger thing. It's like, how we're gonna live in the future. Like we're gonna live in the virtual world, or like a bigger part of our lives are gonna be in the virtual world. So and the best way we thought to achieve that back in the day was people know the movie, and then to connect it with that was the kind of the idea, basically why we connected it. Yeah.
Yeah, we have things like the Open Metaverse Foundation now, and then at VentureBeat we started something called the Metaverse Forum, and it was all about advocating for the open metaverse, actually. And but there's a lot of groups out there now that are sort of raising their concerns that you don't want, just a oligopoly of companies or just one company actually controlling things. Like how long have you sort of felt that sentiment that it's not one company to rule them all, I guess?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it started from the wider public understanding that we're probably going to spend more and more time in virtual worlds, and the metaverse kind of trend or hype really started. That's what made people really think about it more. Because before that was okay, there's games, there's shooters, there's whatever, different types of games we can play, but it's not the next version of the internet. So I think some people understood it before, but the wider public really started thinking about that recently. So that's one thing. And I think the other thing is really it's kind of the Web3 space, which has impacted people's thinking on how to build games, I think. Because the promise of NFTs, for example, is that you can own it and you can do whatever you want with it. Kind of the fact that the interoperability, kind of the promise of interoperability is kind of built into what they are. So I think, and there's a lot of game developers that are coming up now that are thinking about integrating some kind of crypto or Web3 elements to the games. And all of them are by default thinking about more open and more anti-centralization and more pro-decentralization. So I think those things combined kind of really created the moment we are in now, where people really are more open-minded about building a more connected game and more connected world and so forth.
Now, I guess one of the more interesting things I've heard about the metaverse, how it could come to be, came from Jason Rubin over at Meta, and he mentioned that it's going to be, the metaverse is going to be a 3D animated thing. And so the people who know how to, or what you need in order to do that is a game engine, right? And the people who know how to use game engines are game developers. And so it follows then that gaming is going to lead the way into the metaverse, right? And the people who know how to build it already really are here and now at game companies. And so you think of companies like, say, Epic with Unreal, but also with Fortnite, right, or Roblox, and Activision Blizzard with Call of Duty. But you don't really think of an avatar, right, as being that important or that big a deal. So, how did you think like an avatar could actually have more importance, I guess, in something like the metaverse?
Yeah, totally. So I mean, the avatar it's your identity, right? Like that is kind of like the only persistent, logically persistent part of any social virtual experience. Like you need to have an avatar in every 3D world where you like that you visit, and the avatar is always like a representation of yourself. So like, why are you supposed to create an avatar each time from scratch that it looks different and feels different and doesn't represent your real identity? So like we kind of like at some point understood that the avatar can be like the glue or the link between all those different things. Like a single game like can't be the metaverse, right? It's like a single game. It's a single world. A single game engine can't be the metaverse because it's just one game engine. So there need to be some kind of a services that link together different parts of the market, different game engines, different games, different worlds, different cryptocurrencies, different like whatever. So like, and the avatar feels like a very persistent part of every experience naturally. So if you can use that to really like build those bridges, then that's actually very powerful. And also just like from a business perspective, a big part of the metaverse or gaming economy today is around the avatar, right? Like there's games very heavily kind of monetize avatars. People are very willing to pay for avatar assets. If any of you has kids from like 8 or 10 to 15, then you've seen those Roblox and Fortnite, payments on your accounts. Those are avatars. So it's a massive business. And also, like when you open up the avatar and you allow people to buy assets for your avatar that work across thousands of games instead of just one game, then we believe this actually creates a bigger opportunity for games. To sell more stuff just from a person's perspective, and that's because the avatars are more useful for people. They can use them in more and more places, which makes them more likely to spend on avatars. So it felt like a no-brainer business opportunity and a very like strategic position as well.
Yeah. So you can infuse like a 3D animated avatar with a bunch of stuff. Like you can basically put somebody's identity in and sort of verification of who they are, the stuff that they own, I guess, they can bring with them from one place to another. And I guess, yeah, in all the things, I guess, that like really are associated with being able to or wanting to be able to travel into new places, right? And so like, if you can, say, bring stuff that gets translated from one world to another world, like, I don't know, you take your high-level sword and take it into a Call of Duty world, maybe it becomes a high-level gun or something at the border, right? So these are ideas then that you guys have been playing around with then.
Definitely, yeah. So we believe that the avatar is kind of like it's the strongest part because it's something that you have an emotional connection with. It's kind of like naturally when you think about your kind of metaverse experience, it's kind of like a center. Sorry, it's at the center of that. So like you can attach other things to that, like things you own, your wallet, how you pay with things, and so forth. But we're very focused right now on like making sure we make the best avatars and most importantly build the best tools for game developers. And any other things we add are like make game developers' lives better, make it easier for them to monetize games and so forth. That's what we're all about. So any kind of additional services or like parts of the product we add need to be give like game developers more power and more value rather than like us as a platform.
And by the way, I forgot to mention we will be taking questions from the audience too. And I guess if you send through the Slido app, then we'll be able to see the questions come up on the screen when you have them. So I think I guess on the flip side, like why do say consumers or players really want this? Like, are they asking to be able to take their avatars from one place to another? Are they that attached to what they create, I guess?
Yeah, totally. So So consumers want to have an avatar that represents them, number one. Create an avatar that either, like, you can take a selfie and create an avatar that looks like you with Ready Player Me, or you can create something like that doesn't look like you, but it needs to represent kind of what you want to look like or whatever. So that's number one. And then once you have an avatar that you already play with and you like and you maybe buy stuff for, then yes, people want to use it in multiple games. And we see that in our network, like players play several games with their avatars. They sometimes create different avatars for different use cases. So if you have a professional avatar, then it's going to be more professional. It's not going to have face tattoos and things like that. Versus you have like, and that's kind of like your LinkedIn profile, And when you have like an Instagram avatar, it's more social. Then it's going to be cooler and maybe it has face tattoos. But yeah, inside the use case, people want to use the similar avatars.
And as far as like the buzz around the metaverse goes, like I mean, we saw like I don't know, Ready Player One was inspiring for a lot of people. Some people liked it, some people hated it, but it raised the metaverse into the public consciousness, I think. And then of course Mark Zuckerberg in October of 2021 renamed Facebook as Meta, and that. Led to a skyrocketing sort of awareness of the word the metaverse. Like if you looked in the previous 20 years plus, it's 30 years on now since the metaverse word came into being. 2021 was just like the hockey stick up, right? But now it's also like almost like a hockey stick down as well. And it's maybe half of, I guess, the usage you see in something like Google Trends or so. So I wonder what you think about that buzz and the change in the buzz, like what's been happening there.
Yeah, it's first it's nice, so you can focus on building the things. But yeah, so how we think about it generally is like, the metaverse came to the public consciousness like a few years ago, and people started speaking about it a lot, and that's great. The fact that the buzz has come down hasn't changed like how game companies are performing. For example, gaming is a $200 billion industry, which is like almost 4 times bigger than the music industry, for example. So it's a massive industry already. So the metaverse is already here. There's almost 3 billion people that play games. Again, if some of you have like 10 to 15-year-old kids, they hang out with their kids in Roblox. Like that's what they do. Like I used to play games, but I used to also hang out with my friends on a basketball court and, spend time together. And like the basketball was kind of the side activity. But then the main thing was just hanging out together and then spending time together. All that stuff is now, or part of that stuff is now happening in virtual worlds. So the fact that people like speak less about the metaverse, doesn't really change that at all. So there's a whole generation of kids that are metaverse native that are growing up. There are almost 3 billion people that play games, and people will spend more and more time in virtual worlds every year that goes by.
Yeah. And do you think we want to hop from world to world to world? I guess just
yes,
like every 15 seconds or something like that. Or I think like when people say like the metaverse is already here, right? I guess the problem I have with that is like then you can think of Second Life as like the original metaverse back in 2003, and people basically lived their lives in Second Life, I guess. But it didn't feel truly like a metaverse, though, because you're not really traveling between worlds. You can travel within Second Life, but not go from Second Life to World of Warcraft to Roblox to Fortnite, right? And that these borders, they're not porous, right? They're really difficult borders to get through, and like you're going to be paying somebody else as soon as you do that. And so to me, it feels like the metaverse should be something where you go from place to place. You can do it in real time. Like you snap your fingers and you're there, right? Yes. You don't want to wait. You don't want to have all this latency. And yeah, it should feel like you're in the Star Trek holodeck too. It should be like a simulation of something that looks absolutely real, right? And so when you describe it, I think when I describe it that way, I think like maybe it helps address some of that confusion about like, okay, is it here or is it coming in the future, right? And a lot of this science fiction-like stuff is really coming in the future. And so like, if that's the scale, like from Second Life to the holodeck, like where do you think we need to be in order to have just like real businesses?
Yeah, that's a great point, and fully agreed. Like this is the real metaverse is the one where it's fully open, interoperable. You can navigate between different worlds and have a consistent experience. And we're not there yet at all. We're there with like games. Like people spend a lot of time in virtual worlds, which is the first step of the metaverse. Like you need to have interesting experiences and so forth. I think on the scale of like a closed game to like a fully open metaverse, like we're very early, right? Like I think Ready Player Me, we are really like doing some of those things that haven't been done before with avatars, of course. You know, and we're trying to break down, like our mission is to break down walls to build a more connected virtual world. And we definitely see that that's starting to happen. So, you know, we launched a partnership with Mini Royale far away a few weeks ago, for example, where for the first time ever, an avatar from a game, like far away, their game, came out of the game and now is usable in thousands of other games. So this has never ever happened before, which is kind of crazy. If you're not in the industry, it's like it feels like why like has this never happened before? There's a lot of technical reasons, there's a lot of business reasons, but these things are just now starting to happen. Like that was 2 weeks ago when for the first time ever an avatar that originates from a game goes to like thousands of other games or any other games. Like this is crazy. So like very early.
What is that example to, like the particular company, right?
Yeah, so that was a particular company far away. Mini Royale is the game, and basically they had hundreds of thousands of avatars that people owned. They're NFTs. They don't, by the way, they don't have to be NFTs. These particular avatars were, and then people that own those assets can now connect it to Ready Player Me and use it in our entire network. Like the Ready Player Me avatars themselves are already interoperable, but this is an example of a game exporting their existing avatars and allowing them to, be transported to other places. And now, like all the future avatars they will sell, for example, have more value because they're usable not only in their game, but across thousands of different games.
I think you mentioned this example of sneakers, right? If you buy them in one place, then
Yeah, exactly. So it's like, as a user, basically, would you rather pay for sneakers that work in one game only or that travel across thousands of virtual worlds? So what we already see in the early kind of data and what we believe is true at scale especially is that people spend more or more people become like spenders if there's if for interoperable assets, for a sneaker that works in 1,000 games versus like one game.
And then openness is another interesting sort of topic, I guess, that we can get into here. And I think of what we saw happen with crossplay in online games, right? And Fortnite was sort of the prime example of how the market could change. We never used to have games where you could play it on a Nintendo platform against somebody who was on a Sony platform or on the PC or on Xbox, right? And you could play against people or with people who were on your platform, but not against others, right? And so, I guess the interesting thing with the success of Fortnite becoming the game that everybody wanted to play. Then they had the Epic Games had the interesting problem of lots of people saying, "I want to play with my friends," right? But my friends don't have a PlayStation, right? And so how can you make this happen? And so Epic really kind of got market power. They were, they had a game that was so popular, they were making billions of dollars a year. From it. Everybody wanted to play it and be together in it. And so they then went to all the platforms and said, do you want Fortnite on your platform? And of course they do, right? Because it's generating lots of money. Well, then you have to enable crossplay. And, you know, Microsoft was willing to, I think Sony was willing to, Nintendo maybe, maybe thinking like, yeah, this is not a kind of thing we do, right? But you know, if Epic could say like, okay, the others are going to do it, but you aren't, then you're not going to have Fortnite anymore. And it's like it has market power to enable crossplay, which was a more open form of gaming that would benefit everybody. It benefited players. And to me, that's like an example of how you can force a market to be more open, right? And I wonder if there's some lesson in that for how the metaverse could become more open or made to be more open.
Yeah, definitely. So how we think about it, and that's a great example, and that's a major change in the market, right? Like where you can play like games now, it's easier for games to become social networks because, you know, you can play with a friend that is on the phone. And I think like the data that came from that is that people actually ended up, every platform ended up making more money because more people play with friends, like more people like, you know, willing to buy stuff. So like that's kind of a good example of like opening up a market more, actually benefiting everyone involved commercially as well. And like that's on the question, you know, the moment we are driving to get to is kind of working with the early partners that are very open-minded or more open-minded to prove to the rest of the industry that it's just like a commercially, you know, it's a no-brainer decision to build an open avatar system, for example, because you can sell avatar sneakers, like we discussed, that work in 1,000 games, which makes you make more money. So once we can prove that on a sufficient scale with enough data, then like the companies don't have to be open metaverse minded to join the network, to join like and build a more open game. It just becomes a no-brainer business decision. It's like, why would I build a closed avatar system, spend all this time doing that, selling stuff in my game that only 3% of people buy, if I could build an open system and have 25% people buy that stuff, you know? So like it just needs to become a no-brainer business decision, and when it does, then like we're not talking about philosophically aligned with the open metaverse. It doesn't have to be that. It's practical for people to do that, and I think that's the only way this can really happen on scale. So that's what we're trying to do as a company. You know, make the value so like practical that you know it's very clear why people need to open up, as opposed to very open, very philosophically driven, which is the early market and the Web3 space and so forth.
So we got a good question along this topic from Jeremiah Wagstaff here about how much of Ready Player Me is built on open standards, meaning open source and non-proprietary, so that Ready Player Me doesn't end up owning everyone's avatar in the metaverse, right?
Yeah, it's like break down the walls and then build a wall around us, you know. Yeah, we're definitely trying to not do that. So we use open like formats like GLTF, for example. You know, we have open source SDKs, but kind of the weird thing is that interoperable avatars are only possible because we are kind of centralized. So you know, we basically deliver the avatars in different technical specifications and kind of like whatever ways the avatar needs to be delivered at, depending on the game. And we are kind of a centralized service that makes that happen. So as a developer, you can get an avatar for your Unity game in the right format, in the right, you know, animation rig, with the right animation rig, with the right LODs resolution. And as an Unreal desktop game, you can do the same. And it's very hard to kind of like make that core service open source. It's probably possible to run it as like a decentralized service eventually with some like token stuff, but that's not something we're like very focused on now. Right now, we're focused on creating a great end user experience that people can go between games. Game developers have a great avatar system. And that's why we also speak very publicly about our values of like trust and be trusted, and like, you know, our kind of like breaking down walls. So when we start building walls, then people call us out for it.
Yeah. And I guess you mentioned GLTF. I guess this is a 3D graphics format really for the internet. I guess you can think of it as maybe being really good for things like e-commerce, right? But there are other, there's no group that has declared that is the standard yet, really, right? And there are groups out there like the Linux Foundation, acquired the Open Metaverse Foundation, and they are committed to creating a lot of standards and putting a lot of like programming talent behind that, right? And so they're putting some real meat behind the words people have about wanting to have an open metaverse, right? And there's the Kronos group as well. I think that is going to collect a lot of different industries together and companies to establish open standards for the metaverse. And yeah, I guess you know, NVIDIA with the Omniverse is really behind and backing universal scene description, USD, as the way to share 3D assets around. Especially at the high end, like it came from Pixar originally, and came down from you know, high-end film and animation, along with games, industrial metaverse applications as well. And so, in some ways, there's some competition, I think, maybe between GLTF and USD, right? And I guess we'll see how that plays out. But I guess, like, you're running a company, right? And then do you have time to wait for these standards to be worked out, right?
No.
So,
Yeah.
so what happens?
Yeah, totally. So USD, for example, like, it can be actually complementary with GLTF because it's more like for scenes and bigger like bigger models and like worlds and things like that. And GLTF is better for like single 3D objects. And we'll probably support USD at some point.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we're not waiting because like there's no standards right now. There's like very small kind of beginnings of some standards for avatars that, you know, very niche kind of like games use. We support different platforms. We support different technical specs. We support many different standards, or like not even standards, but like any custom systems that games want to use. So we can use a custom rig, we can use a custom, you know, topology, whatever you need for your game. And that's what makes ReadyPlayMe powerful, and that's what makes interoperability possible in a world where like there's no standards. And that's kind of the centralized service that delivers the avatars in different specs and different, you know, standards essentially. Yeah, so that's kind of like how we work through that. It's just we support a lot of different things. We try to give the developer exactly what they would get if they will build it themselves. Not perfect, but as much flexibility as possible. Even different styles of avatars, you know, so you can get exactly the spec, exactly the style of the avatar that you need. That's still work in progress.
And I don't know if everybody knows much about the whole process of creating standards, technology standards, but yeah, groups like the Kronos group have done this over many technologies and many years. And one thing that's always part of it at some point is they kind of have like a bake-off, right? And say, okay, what are all the different things we could use as a standard for doing this particular task? And in bake-off, basically people show up with either hardware or whatever software that works, right? And it just does what it's supposed to do. Like in this case, it would be, say, being able to display 3D graphics very quickly at, you know, full speed in any kind of screen, right? Any kind of screen you would use to view it or access it, or whether it's in VR or on your phone. And if it works, then it's like a candidate to be the standard, right? And so you can wind up with working technology in a competitive market with something that could become a de facto standard, right? And so I imagine maybe this is what you would hope for, is that whatever you're creating for avatar standards really becomes the de facto standard. Like everybody in the market likes it, wants to use it, and you win, right?
Yeah, totally. So I mean, I think one part of it is the kind of the file, and the standard in that sense, right? The other thing is like you are kind of the default platform. So the file format, let's say like avatars will be fully standardized, and it would go and like could upload any asset to any game. Then there's still like a problem with the economic kind of side, like the business part of interoperability. And you kind of like need a service to manage that. So like when you buy an asset from game A, you actually spend all of the time in game B. Should game B get paid for that? Or like what if you buy $1,000 asset or $10 asset and you want to use it in a game? Like the thing that makes the asset valuable is the fact that you can use it in a game. So like games need to get paid for allowing assets to enter their worlds. And a standard, like a file format, won't really just change that, or they won't kind of solve that problem. So what we were attempting to do is like, build a standard, but also like build an end-to-end service platform that solves all of those different problems with interoperability, which is on one end, technical standards and so forth, but on the other end is the business deal, like business problems that come with interoperability. Or like, what if there's a brand that wants to sell their assets in virtual worlds, but not in shooters? How do you manage that? Like, if there was an open standard, you can just upload any asset, then like that wouldn't like work. So like, there's a lot of kind of business complexity as well that needs to get solved on top of the file format. And we want to be the solution for all those things combined. So like, make interoperability happen, whatever it takes, on the technical side, on the business side, and figure out the model that basically benefits all of that, all of the different parts of the market, like users, developers, which is the most important thing we're focused on, brands. You just see like creators. What we're trying to get to is just like a system that works and benefits all of them. And it's not easy, to figure out what that kind of business model, for example, exactly is going to be without like that existing at all so far.
And we had a question from Anonymous here that was about just what are the challenges that stand in the way of an interoperable metaverse, right? Do you see anything else that we haven't sort of mentioned so far? Like,
Yeah.
what's hard about this, I guess?
What's hard about this? Yeah. So I mean, what's hard about this is like people are so used to like first the only group of people today that know how to build interesting virtual experiences is game developers. And a lot of people are trying to figure it out, but this is the core like market that knows how to build interesting experiences. And building a game is hard, and there's a high failure rate and so forth. So the industry is generally pretty like risk averse. So you don't want to like build an open economy and see what's going to happen. If you built like 10 economies before and they're closed walled gardens, and you know what's going to happen when you do this or that, and so forth. So most people just keep doing what they're doing. They just keep building closed walled garden worlds, and they don't want to change because like, why would they? And I think that's like one kind of like challenge. Like, it's not even like technical. It's just like getting people to go over go to the other side and try to open up the avatars, for example. And it's happening, but it takes a leap for most companies to really change their ways. Because like closed walled gardens is the way the industry knows how to build things, and to really push them to open up is hard.
It's like the self-interest versus collective interest, right? And then, like if we had great technology, like the iPhone, right? It's such a perfect phone, right? It's a great phone. Why would we ever need anything else besides the iPhone? Like, why don't we just standardize on that, right?
Yeah.
And yet, something else came along to give us some choice there and competition, and so like Android, Google's Android has sort of arose as a kind of counterforce in the market, really, to stop the world from being completely built around a single company's technology, right? I mean, I do think that that kind of lesson in the market is going to inform the strategies of all the companies that are going to be interested in the metaverse. And like, something has to be coming from Apple, right? And when they drop it in the market, it's going to be like, the Lightning connector versus USB, right? And so, I don't know. I mean, I think the self-interest is like the easy thing to do is to make your game for the iPhone, right? And not have to worry about all the other phones out there with Android. I mean, like, how do we get from like self-interest to something more like collective interest?
Yeah, I mean, I think like it has to, like how we think about it is like just very practical. Like it has to be better for the game. It has to be profitable for them to like open up. And there need to be enough kind of brave early adopters that are willing to do that and build in a new way that kind of show the rest of the industry that this is the better way to do this. This is a better end user experience. This is a better way to run your business. Like that's ultimately what's going to change people's mindsets and going to make them change, I think. And on top of that, like if you can educate the end users, people that use avatars and use different games, play different games, and create some pressure from that side for people to like think more open, then that's also one way you can get there. But we fundamentally believe that this is like going to happen, and it's going to be beneficial for everyone involved. It's going to be beneficial for game developers, and we see that in our network now. Like when people have cross-game avatars, they can acquire people from the existing network that already have an avatar, have bought a branded asset, bought an NFT or something that goes to their game. They get a revenue share for that. They can now sell stuff in their game that works in thousands of games. So like it's clearly valuable already, but it just takes time it takes time to build a game as well. So like a lot of the things we have. We are working now, like it will be launched in 1 year, in 2 years, like the bigger games. So it just takes time for the industry to change and for more data and proof points to be out there, and the more game, designers that understand how to build things around more open systems.
Yeah. So we got another good question here. Do you see the metaverse being adopted by B2B, and if so, what are the key use cases that will drive that adoption? I have an answer on this, so I mentioned NVIDIA and the Omniverse, right? And NVIDIA's GTC conference is next week. I am moderating a session on the metaverse for that as well, and that's that's the wider world of technology really, and not just games. And so like the Omniverse is NVIDIA's tool for collaboration, collecting all the different tools you could use to make different things for the metaverse, where there's Maya, 3D Studio Max, Unreal Engine, Unity, etc. And they're really targeting more the enterprise metaverse, really, and companies that are way outside of gaming. They're starting to use game engines, right? But they're like BMW is using them to design its factories, and they call these digital twins, right? And so they're going to design a car factory. They have one that's going to go up in Hungary in a couple of years. And they want to perfect the design of this factory in the Omniverse, really, in the industrial metaverse. And then basically create a digital twin of the factory and then build the real factory in real life. But they're also going to instrument this factory with enough sensors so that it collects real-world information that tells it whether or not the actual design in the digital world is a good one or not. Like, if the data coming in says, like, oh, we got all these things wrong, then they go back and they refine the design of the digital twin and change it. And so, like, this loop of information is actually extremely useful for anybody manufacturing anything. Right, and so like all factories could be designed this way going forward, and so I think that's an example. Like NVIDIA has also brought up that their GPUs are going into the supercomputers, and one of the biggest problems in the world right now is to create a way of predicting climate change, right? And so they want to create this digital twin of the Earth I'm going to use all the supercomputers of the world to figure this out and try to predict climate change for decades to come. But in order to do that, it has to be accurate to like a meter level construction of like both the atmosphere, but everything on the planet as well. And so they have to create a digital twin of the Earth, which is crazy. Like, but it has this use. Like, there's also like multiple uses for this kind of thing. Like, you could use this to test self-driving cars in a digital world, because you can't test these cars on the streets because you're probably going to kill people, right? So there's that, and so like there's dual use technologies that I think can help bring the metaverse along closer. There's a game developer out there, Brendan Green, who is creating. He's the creator of PUBG, PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds. He's the pioneer of battle royale in games, and he's creating something he calls Artemis, which is basically a digital twin of the Earth, and he wants to use that for a game where you just go in and you create your own games within it. And so like the interesting thing that the CEO of NVIDIA said was that when asked when you create Earth 2, the whole digital twin of the Earth, are you basically going to get the metaverse for free? And he said yes. So you take that, you give it to Brendan Green, he creates his gaming world, right? So I think that's where companies that are in this space don't have to do it all themselves. Yeah. They could get the metaverse for free. Right?
Totally. And I think that's like the gaming industry really likes to build things from scratch. So I think, but there's a new kind of, like the trend is that smaller teams build bigger games and they want to do less things from scratch, and they want to focus on the experience that comes out of it over reinventing everything. Yeah, and on the B2B question, we work with a lot of companies that use do virtual training, for example. So there's like a nuclear plant they're building, for example, where they do virtual training to operate the plant, and like some emergency training and things like that. There's like a few hundred, maybe there's like 50 to 100 companies in our network that are doing things like that. It's also like education and all kinds of things like that. But yeah, B2B is like virtual training, I think, is big.
We should we should get through some of these audience questions here. What do you predict to be the trajectory of avatar aesthetics? Sorry.
Bless you. Yeah, good. Yeah, so basically, we think that people want different aesthetics for different types of use cases. So you might want a fully photorealistic avatar for like a telepresence kind of type of experience. So like when you want to speak with your family, for example, over long distances or something like that, you might want to use as realistic as possible of an avatar. Versus like if you play with your friends and you like fly in a mystery forest with a unicorn, then you might not want to be like a fully realistic avatar. You might want to be a version of yourself. It's like your Instagram profile, it's a version of yourself. So yeah, there's going to be different things, but we believe most experiences are going to be using like an augmented version of yourself over a realistic avatar. We started 9 years ago by scanning people. So that's like a very realistic avatar. People fucking hate that. They don't like what they look like. Exactly. So you want some kind of augmentation probably. But yeah, things will get more realistic for sure. Over time, we might create some more realistic styles.
I guess here's that question about whether NFTs are like sort of on a road to nowhere. Or they're going to be the on-ramp to the metaverse, right? Yeah. So people are adopting NFTs as their online identity. Any plans to partner with companies like Yuga to let people use NFTs to build their avatar?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, so I think generally the Web3 space, just to comment on that, is like it's definitely pushing the world towards a more open metaverse, because on one end, it's like a set of technologies that really enable the ownership of assets across platforms. If there's a pair of sneakers and you want to own it in 10 different games, then there needs to be some kind of a database where you store the ownership of that asset. And it can be a centralized database like ReadyPlayMe today, or it can be a decentralized database like blockchain. So, and if you have a pair of sneakers that works in thousands of experiences, then blockchain is a great way to manage the ownership of that asset that then every game itself can tap into, and that's a great way to do that. So that's the technical side. And the other side is the kind of the philosophical side, which we spoke about before, like companies wanting to open up. Like that space has a very kind of open mindset. So, and that's actually kind of coming into gaming, that's making some kind of new gaming companies build more open, and that's also very big. What comes to NFT avatars specifically and NFT avatars, PFPs, then we've done some stuff. Like we built the project for CryptoPunks, where you can create a 3D version of your punk and use it in ReadyPlayMe in all the different games we work with. We haven't done something with Yuga at the moment, but yeah, this will be probably a part of how like one identity you can use, like an NFT avatar. The problem is like the communities are super small. Like it's 10,000 PFPs. And I have a lot of them, by the way. So like I'm definitely I'm a fan. But it just it's not very practical for a gaming company to like build a custom integration for like a 6,000 person max audience, unless it's a very high value audience, which like Bored Apes, for example, are. But anyways, like we're definitely going to support those avatars on the platform, and we don't want to be the only avatar in the metaverse. We don't want to be the avatar network or the avatar rails that make all the avatars travel across worlds. Either they're from a game or from an NFT collection, doesn't matter.
Yeah. So when we mentioned that like the Google Trends was showing the metaverse was going way down in usage or searches on Google Trends, the thing that's going way up is everybody knows is like ChatGPT and generative AI. And I do wonder, like, when you put this, user-generated content trend that you guys are riding on, where everybody wants to create their own thing, right? With generative AI, then what do we get? Like, do we get professional quality user-generated content, right?
Yeah, totally. So that's something we've been really looking into a lot recently, because we believe it's really going to change how games are built and how avatars are built. So, generative AI allows anyone to use their imagination, create prompts, use images to create assets. Right now, the 2D part of that is really good. 3D is not there yet. Something we did recently was we launched a generative AI-driven avatar creator, where you can choose a hoodie or different kind of assets, and then you can write in a prompt to kind of like create whatever you want. So my avatar is wearing a hot dog pattern hoodie with a dark background right now, for example. So you can basically give people a way to create 3D assets that are not 3D artists, which opens new ways to create UGC. And it's just like 2D textures and 3D models right now, but 3D, what we think is going to happen like within the next 12 to 24 months in a decent quality, which means that more people will be able to create assets and sell them, and there might be new ways people create avatars.
I guess the big question then becomes, do we need 10 times more or 100 times more or 1,000 times more things created by users? Or do we just need better games created by professionals? Right?
That's a great question. Yeah. I mean, there are examples of both working. Roblox, is a very compelling experience or game or platform, and it's purely built by non-professional developers. As in the games are built by non-professional developers and assets, while like most of the gaming industry is very much built by professionals. I think just more assets, more 3D models won't change much, actually. Like, it just creates more noise. What's most important, most valuable is interesting virtual experiences where people want to spend time with their friends and with other people. And I think like just like the fact that game production becomes cheaper and cheaper, especially with generative AI, making it a lot easier to build a game. There will be new game modes. People will be less risk averse. The smaller teams build bigger games. They're actually interesting. There's way more experimentation, which actually leads to new kinds of gameplay, new kinds of social experiences in virtual worlds, and that's ultimately like the most valuable part. Just the fact that you can create 3D assets is cool, but it's just like one part, right? Ultimately, the experiences are what matters.
Then just going to try to speed through some of these questions. Like, how do you guarantee ethics in the metaverse? Like, we'll have this open space and no regulation.
Yeah, it's gonna be a mess. Ethics is a wide kind of a topic. I think the more open the space is, the more like crazy things will go down, and the platforms themselves will enforce some rules. The AI itself can be very helpful with those things, like 3D assets, validating them, hate speech, whatever. All those things will be a lot easier to manage with AI, and already is. But yeah, no idea. Like, if you want a fully safe space, it's a fully closed space. If you want an interesting space, it's more open. It's like or like Disney World, versus like New York. I like to live in New York more.
Yeah. So, do you believe that in the future we will have copyrights for avatars? So I can't create an avatar equal to a celebrity avatar.
Yeah, I mean, you can do that now. Any 3D artist that is good can go and take an image of a celebrity and create an avatar of that celebrity now. But yeah, equal to celebrity avatar. Yeah, I mean, who knows? I don't know. What we're focused on right now is creating a great end user experience for like our customers and build great developer tools, and then we'll address the problems as they arise.
So we talked about gaming. What about the film business leading the way to the metaverse?
Yeah, so that's something we discussed yesterday as well. You actually have a point of view on that.
I think the interesting thing that I see is that the film universe and the gaming universe are becoming one, right? They're becoming one entertainment ecosystem, and you get things like The Last of Us on HBO out of that ecosystem, right? And then I think that that should be encouraged, and it's a great thing. And I think that combination is also what leads us towards something like the metaverse. It's just like there's these intellectual properties and franchises that then are accessible in different ways through comics, through streaming media, through games, whatever. Like you can get to The Walking Dead whatever way you want, right?
Yeah, totally. And then, you might be a fan of a movie or like an IP, and that if there's a game that is more for a general audience, that can also pull you into a game. Or like we work with a lot of brands, for example, like Tom Hilfiger is building a web kind of, it's not a film actually, but it's like a brand IP. They're building a web store where you can buy virtual assets and then you can port them to games. So you might be a fan of an IP or a brand, and that actually brings you to the metaverse. And then you might start liking it and come back.
And then how many avatars have been created in Ready Player Me, and how innovative are they?
Yeah, so innovative, I don't know. So how many avatars we created? Like, I don't know, 12, 13 million or something like that. And two people stick there with their real appearances. Depends on the types of applications. In a professional app, there are 95% of people making an avatar from a selfie. In a VR chat, for example, it's like 45, 50%. So it really depends. If you play with your real friends, it's more likely to be similar to yourself. If you go in a virtual kind of a crazy experience, then you might be less like yourself.
Okay. I guess last question then. What impact can an open metaverse have on the future of commerce and entertainment? An easy one.
It's going to change everything. Yeah, I mean, future commerce and entertainment. I mean, I think the amount of money people spend on virtual assets is connected with the amount of time they spend in virtual worlds. So that number is going to go up over time. The open metaverse allows more brands, more individual creators to take part of that economy and to set up a store and sell stuff that works in thousands of games instead of having to go to a single game developer and convince them to add yourself to their store. Or like for a brand, for example, they can focus, like they work with us, they can focus on creating assets and selling them in their community, to their people, and we make sure that those assets work in a lot of games. So I think the open metaverse would just be open, so more people can take part, and more people will benefit from it.
Very good. Thank you very much, everybody. Great questions.
Yes, thank you so much.